So we are going to enter into our second session, which is looking at digital technologies towards resilience in agriculture. And for that, I'm going to ask our first panelist, Dr. Technoligical, who is Group Executive for ICT at the Agricultural Research Council, driving a lot of digitalization programs within agricultural R&D environments. And after that, we are going to have Dr. Duprise, who is also coming from an industry perspective, looking at spatial intelligence. So he is a director within a company called Spatial Intelligence, looking at the applications of GIS and GIS models into agricultural systems. So Dr. Setibe, thank you. And if I can ask for 15 minutes.
How do you control this? Oh, yes, yeah. Good morning. In fact, I thought I was a second panelist, so I was a bit shocked when you called my name, but nevertheless, I am ready for the presentation. As Dr. Farai has indicated, I will be talking about digital technologies, particularly focusing on smart agriculture. But I thought it's important as well that I start at a very high level, talk about top strategic technology trends, and then I'll drive a little bit into smart agriculture. But I want to conclude with a very, very important aspect, which is blockchain technology and how it can be applied in agriculture in particular. I've got quite a number of slides, but like Doctor has asked me to do, I'll try and go through them very, very quickly. But I thought it's important that I cover all those three key aspects. Starting with technology trends. In fact, what Gartner does on an annual basis, it will conduct a survey of number of CEOs, and they ask them a number of questions, in particular priorities. So for 2022, they asked about more than 100 CEOs throughout the entire throughout the entire world, wanting to understand what are the top three key priorities for 2022. They came up with efficiency as number one, and the second one, digitalization, and the third one is growth. And then in response to that, they asked the CIO, understanding what are the top three priorities for the CEO, how do you respond to those kind of priorities? And the first one, in response to growth, they indicated the force multiplier. I'll come to that in terms of what it means. The second one, in terms of digitalizations, they indicated creative technology, which is what we're going to be speaking about today. And then the third one, efficiency. Scalability is very, very fundamental. I'll touch on all three. Based on those three key priorities, they then develop themes around those priorities. And the first one is how do you accelerate growth? The second one is change. And then the third one is trust, which is very, very fundamental. As we bring all these technologies, trust becomes very, very important in terms of how do you move forward with these technologies. In terms of themes, so they look at the themes in terms of priorities and they map them to technologies. You'll see at the bottom there, they talk about data, and the other aspect is cloud, which I'll touch on it a little bit. And then in the middle layer, the key one is the second one, which is hyper automation. And I'll also touch on the decision intelligence. I will not go through on all of them, but I'll touch on the key ones that I think is important for us to understand before we move to the next area. In terms of trust, data is very, very key. I'm sure we all know. Without data, you are not be able to make an informed decision. But it's not also important, it's not only about decisions. It's about how fast you can make those kind of decisions. So how you organize your data is very, very important, but you should be able to dispense data at a speed that is required for managers to make decisions. That's a very, very fundamental statement there. And then the second one, once you have got data, you need infrastructure for you to be able to handle that data. Once you have established a proper infrastructure, because it doesn't help you have got what you call big data, but you don't have the infrastructure for it. Develop a proper infrastructure that is able to manage that particular data. But most importantly, once you have got the data now organized in a manner, you should be able to have what we call platform services. And for you to have platform services, you want devices to talk to each other. I'll talk about the platform services in the next slide, just to expand it a little bit more. But what is very, very fundamental in this particular slide is the left side where it says as a service. It can be either infrastructure, it can be technology, but you want to provide it as a service, which is very fundamental. Moving on now to the next one, which is in terms of change that you need in the organization. I think decomposing applications that we have got is very, very important. We have got various data sources, various applications, but they must be able to talk to each other. And they must be able to talk to each other in a manner that we are able to get some kind of intelligence. That's very, very important. That also assists you in terms of how do you make decisions much faster. So and that's where the issue of decision support, augmentation, and in particular automation come into play. But as you do that, you want to make sure that you do them in an affordable manner, which is cheaper from the technology perspective, but secondly, faster for the business to adopt. Most importantly as well, for the customers, you must have some kind of business models that you are able to derive value out of that particular exercise that you are conducting. So the three key aspects there is cheaper, faster, and better in terms of for you to get value. Key outcomes: quality in the process, speed, and agility. They all go together. You can't have one and not the other. Because if you have got quality and there's no speed, then it doesn't really help, because now you made the wrong decision already by the time you receive that particular data. So they must all go together, which is quality, speed, and data, and agility. Moving on to the, to the last one. The first two are fundamental for you to drive it to the last point. But essentially, this is what goes out to the public, which is what we call visual reality. You'll see there on the left-hand side, we've got what we call retail VR. VR stands for visual reality. You are able to visualize what you are able to see. Whether you go to a retails, you must get some kind of a similar kind of experience. I'm sure we have seen in terms of 3Ds, in terms of online learning, what difference had it made during the COVID. Bring it closer to us, if you look at geolocation services, if you are able to provide that particular visualization, it helps on customers or on researchers to be able to make an informed decision just by looking at the pictures. Just wrapping in this particular exercise, I think we are all familiar with what the first component, which is automation. But automation is fixed. Now, lately, what we have seen happening, we're moving toward autonomous. That's why we talk about self-driving vehicles. But now technology has moved even far beyond that, whereby we are looking at autonomic. What it means is that you are able to self-modify. If the software, for instance, has got a bug, it should be able to pick up that particular bug and modify itself. But of course, for you to be able to do all those kind of technology, you will need an infrastructure and you will need a platform that you are able to run all those kinds of services. I want to now move to the closer to us in terms of the discussion for today. But before I do that, I thought it was important I just raised some of the key issues in terms of what constrains us in agriculture. The first one is inefficiencies. The second one is infrastructure. The third one is security. And the fourth one is uncertainty. And if you look at the inefficiencies, that's where we have got low-hanging fruit in terms of what we can do in terms of technology. Of course, infrastructure such as electricity, the roads, and others are also important. And when you look at security, which is theft of stock, which is quite prevalent lately, and then there's uncertainties around what we are going to do as a country in terms of land reform there. When it comes to technology, particularly focusing on efficiencies, precision agriculture, I think the previous speaker spoke about it, is very, very fundamental. But of course, like I've indicated, it requires infrastructure. The primary focus, we must make sure that we have got infrastructure that we need. And once we have got a proper and reliable infrastructure, we are able to look at precision agriculture. What it means, in short, you are able to map all the crop types, monitoring of growth stages, weed mapping, water requirement that's required for particular crops. Those are just some of the things that we can do in terms of precision agriculture. At ARC in particular, we have got a number of advisory services. This is just one of them, whereby we are looking at diseases, And we are assisting small farmers in terms of how do they go about managing this kind of diseases. So what I'm showing here is just one of the advisory services. The other one is looks at cultivars, that providing a comprehensive information as far as cultivars is concerned. And then the third one looks at how do you assess farmers, particularly for the cattle breeding. So we have got about more than 30 of those applications, but the key is that is the impact of those applications that we are developing as the ARC to the farmers. I want to now talk about blockchain, which is, I think, the theme for today in terms of food safety. You will see the blockchain has got a number of use cases. You can use it in a supply chain. You can use it in manufacturing. It's very, very popular in finance. But there is some potential use case in food safety, and that's what I want to focus on today. So, but before I even go to those food safety, at a very high level, I thought it was important that I just mentioned what is blockchain. In its simplest form, blockchain is a shared ledger. That's what it means. But it has got a number of permutations trying to solve a particular problem. If you look in this particular picture here, you have got a number of stakeholders, we as a bank, auditors, record management, and over the entire blockchain, the entire value chain. What is very, very fundamental here is that this type of, from this type of picture, is inefficient, it's expensive, and it's very vulnerable. So what do you want to do? You want to make sure you've got what we call a shared ledger, which is permissions, which is got consensus, provenance, immutable, and finality. What it means is that consensus, if you've got about 6 people within a value chain, they must all agree on a particular agenda. For instance, I think to make it much simpler so that we understand what it means by consensus. NATO, for example, in terms of what's happening in terms of a political landscape, if you want to join this movement called NATO, all 30 members must agree. If one doesn't agree, in other ways you cannot do that. It's the same concept in terms of a blockchain. All the other stakeholders that are there, okay, I can see I'm running out of time. Let me just, so the four key fundamentals in terms of blockchain is that shared ledger, smart contracts, consensus, and privacy. Those are the 4 principles that drive blockchain technology. I want to move to where I talk about in terms of particularly for our space. So if you look into this particular picture, you have got a farmer, you have got a processor, you have got a warehouse, you have got distribution, you have got consumers, you have got planting, which is very close to farming. All those stakeholders, they need to agree, they need to cooperate with one another to ensure that this particular solution is effective, which is blockchain. Let's now move to particularly the Walmart case study, which is what I want to talk about today, essentially. Blockchain fundamentally is about in terms of food safety, accessing of information. It can prevent counterfeiting, but most importantly, it provides transparency throughout to all the key stakeholders. So in terms of what it does, in terms of provenance, it provides consumer, supplier, carriers, retailer within the value chain with transparency. That's number 1. How do you do that in terms of digitalizations? But the key benefit is that you can take an item from beginning to end, which is what is very essential as far as blockchain is concerned. Let's have a look now. We may all recall what happened in terms of 2006. There was an issue in terms of Spanish. And you can imagine, it says there it was about 199 cases. 3 deaths, 31 HUS. Those are the diseases that are related to the kidneys. For a period of a month, spinach could not be sold in 2006. So you can imagine now what it does to the entire world in terms of not being able to sell that particular spinach for a period. What blockchain does, it combines all those stakeholders in terms of how are you able to trace. So what Walmart and IBM did, they had a pilot which was run about 3 years ago. It focused particularly on mango and pork. The mango one was done in China, and then the pork one was done in the US. But if you look at the process from the beginning of the planting of a mango all the way to shipping to the store, there are quite a number of activities, about 10, 12 of them in total. By the time a mango gets into the other side, it's very difficult if there's a problem to trace it back to where it came from. And that can be very, very, very problematic in terms of when there is an issue in terms of problems. I'm almost wrapping up now. So let's look in terms of pork in particular in China. China's customers in particular, they demand trust. So what happened in terms of that particular pilot? Walmart had to make sure that all the activities in terms of pork, they've got a smart tech. They follow the product all the way to packaging, using cameras as well as RFI, making sure that at every single stage within the process, there are cameras. It's a very expensive process, but it helps in terms of you tracing back to where the problem might have arisen. Shipping, in terms of shipping of the trucks deployed, they were able to put technology within the trucks, such as temperature, humidity sensors, to make sure in terms of quality, should there be a problem, they're able to trace it back as well as to where it happened as well. Similarly, in terms of mango as well, it was done in the China, like I said, but what was important there was to make sure that there is accountability. Food quality was very essential. And they were able to reduce what used to be solved in 7 days into 2.2 seconds. Very, very important. But what is very critical is the cooperation between different stakeholders within the chain. Just to conclude, blockchain can save time, remove cost, reduce risk, and increase trust, which is very, very important. I think with that, I think I'll stop it here, since I have now running out of time. But thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tebo. I'm thinking of foot and mouth disease and blockchain. So I might want to ask that question at some point. But without wasting time, we'd call our next speaker, panelist who is virtual. So I'm not sure from my tech side, is he ready? Thank you. You can start. The floor is yours, Eugene. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure that you're all able to see this, the presentation that I've just put on.
Yes, so we are able to see the presentation, but can you all hear? Oh. Okay, let us just sort the tech side, this side. So is it possible to increase the volume? Okay. Can you go over again?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. If you can just see if you all can hear me and just let me know, then I can move on with the presentation.
Yes, thank you. You can go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So, sorry just for not being there. We're busy with a project for the Department of Agriculture for crop estimates. So it's very important in terms of food security, and the project ran a bit late and I need to do a presentation. So unfortunately I couldn't be down there, and my apologies for that. So my presentation is with regards to the digital technology innovations towards resilient agricultural food systems. So just a quick base in terms of what we do from the company side, SIQ, is we are very much focused on spatial information, as has been alluded to. Our spatial information is built up from a platform of data collection, which we then further process the information, and ultimately we would like to get to a sort of the pinnacle of all things, which is spatial business intelligence for governments, for departments, for provincial departments, and our very much focus is in the sphere of agriculture. And I think it's for today's discussion, I just want to highlight the areas that I think is very relevant to my presentation today. And this is with regards to technologies such as digital and biotechnologies that have revolutionized the agricultural sector with positive results in improved production efficiencies under limited resources. Now, importantly, my presentation will focus on the ability to predict production challenges and the response of agricultural sectors to such stresses, as well as improved market structures and the accessibility to all sectors of agriculture. So I think we can agree that in terms of things such as climate change, etc., we are very much focused ultimately on measuring what the production is. And there's a very good saying that goes that if you can never manage what you can't measure. And I would just like to highlight that again. You can't manage what you can't measure. For us, as a company, it's very important to measure. So if we're looking at things such as climate change, it's important to know if something has really changed, or are we just measuring it incorrectly and we think there are changes happening. So especially in Africa, I think the measuring of things such as production outputs is very limited. Our previous speaker, Dr. Satibe, has highlighted some of the constraints as being inefficiencies and infrastructure, lack of infrastructure. So those inefficiencies in terms of measuring properly will highlight some negative effects down the line. And I think it's important for us to measure production correctly. And the project that we've implemented over the past almost 20 years now is a project looking at crop estimates. And the project was basically designed with Africa in mind. So where we know there's a lack of infrastructure to implement projects, where we know there's inefficiencies, and this project really was designed around that area. And I'll highlight some of that a bit later. But let's just start with the project and the outcome of this project. So the success of this project is basically measured by this slide that I have now, which this slide only focuses on one crop, but we do multiple crops for our National Department of Agriculture. And this is now focused on the total maize. This is what we have estimated in the beginning of the season, and then it's compared at the end of the season when all deliveries have been done and the crop has been measured through various organizations such as the South African Grain Information Services, etc. So you can see there on that slide that I've sort of highlighted three different periods. The first period is from 1998 to 2003, and this is the measurement. If it was a perfect system, all the bars will be around the 0%, and this is the difference between the actual final crop that was measured and the crop that we estimated. So you can see the black line on the top and the bottom gives you the 5% deviations from the actual crop. And we try and stay within that 5%, and if we can, within 2.5%. So you'll see from the period 1998 to 2003, there's lots of times that the crop was underestimated, and you'll see all the estimations were underestimations. Then the next period, 2004 to 2008, also a number of times it's been over the 5% mark. At least there's one sort of estimation that was a bit of an overestimate. And then you see the period 2009 to 2021 last year, and you can see most of them are within the 5% mark. In fact, predominantly the ones are below the 2.5% mark. So our crop estimate, and this is when the project was implemented since 2007, and you can see the impact that it's had on crop estimates. So our government has a very good idea of what the crop is on a monthly basis in terms of policy setting and planning that makes a massive difference. So just in essence how the project sort of starts, and I want to include all the forms of technology that's used. So it starts off with remote sensing and the mapping of various fields. We've mapped, this is a map of South Africa indicating all the sort of black dots that you see is individual fields that's been mapped. And you're looking at approximately 14 million hectares of fields that's been mapped in South Africa. And South Africa has a total area of approximately 122 million hectares. So there's one of the areas of technology that's been used with remote sensing and the mapping. We've also developed a number of data capturing tools. Obviously, our capturing takes place in the field, so we need quite a lot of tools. This is typically the tools that's been developed for that, and this is all in-house development technology that's playing a massive part with regards to hardware as well as software. Then the next sort of technology environment is GIS, Geographic Information Systems, that plays also a very important role in terms of the whole planning of the project. Yes, GIS is used for the stratification, and in simple terms, that just means if we're looking for a specific crop such as maize, where are we likely to find that crop? So this is all the sort of phases of stratification to highlight areas. You can see how the areas has become smaller and smaller, where we're actually looking at finding our crop of interest that we're looking for. Then the next sort of technology environment is GIS, but more with reference to geostatistics. So it's important for us, because we're using a sample frame, and not a sort of census approach, because it's very time critical to develop crop estimates in all countries. So you can see we use a sort of a grid frame that we refer to as a point frame, and then we select various fields with that point frame from a statistical platform, and that's another form of sort of technology that's been incorporated in this project. Then further on, we do a data analysis, we do an aerial observation, which I'll highlight a bit more just now. But there's a specific fields that's been overflown, and the crop type has been captured for each of those fields, and those sort of gray lines that you can see there are the actual track that's been flown to actually capture that information in the field. This is our platform that we use. It's an aerial platform, which we do an observation approach. So you can see on the right-hand side is the pilot. On the left-hand side is what we refer to as an observer. These observers are typically farmers that are familiar with the areas that we're operating in, and they're capturing the information as we fly through the different areas. You can see that it's at quite a low altitude. We fly at approximately 300 feet above the ground, and that's a typical picture that you'll be seeing. And that's what it looks like from so in future, I believe when the drone technology catches up in terms of being able to cover extensive areas, at this stage, extensive areas are only covered by military drones, and more commercial type of drones are not covering it. But I think in the near future, we'll have drones that will be able to cover these areas. The only problem is you sort of lose the observation side, where you have a farmer who can see context, which is extremely important. So to capture the right information, you need to be able to see the context, in which you'll probably lose in the drone environment, but I think it's going to play a role in future. So in essence, what I would like to sort of highlight with today's presentation is that this is only possible through the integration of a number of technologies, which I've highlighted sort of individually as I went along. So if you look at this slide, and we start there in the top left corner, it's an aerial platform, which is very important. And the reason being is it is very cost effective, and it covers a large area in a very short space of time. Our previous speaker highlighted that data needs to be faster. We need to capture data faster and collect it faster, because in agriculture, the environment changes all the time. So if we can't collect it fast, then it becomes really irrelevant. So that's a very good platform. It also, the nice thing about that platform, it doesn't require a lot of infrastructure. So in Africa, where we have infrastructure challenges such as proper roads, on getting to places to collect information, the aerial platform is ideal in terms of those environments. And that's exactly why that environment was created in terms of an aerial platform. There's obviously the normal data capturing tools, which is very important. Then sort of on the bottom right, We've got the Geographic information system, which is extensively used. I think one of the previous speakers also highlighted that spatial planning is critical. So all our projects, specifically in agriculture, is very much spatially focused because agriculture is very much a spatially distributed environment and sector. So it almost becomes impossible if you do not plan it from a geographic information system perspective. Also, satellite imagery, as you've seen, is used in terms of not just for the planning side of mapping out various the crop fields, but also in terms of determining crop strains, where crops are experiencing some strains in certain areas, and those are also highlighted. And then very importantly, the human capital, that's built up over time. We've got a number of producers that work with us in the aerial platform environment where they can distinguish between around 40 to 50 different crop types in the South African environment. So it's very important, and that's built up over time. And then in the center of it all is a statistical framework, which we refer to as a geographic sampling frame, which is very much used worldwide in terms of calculating crop types. But again, the very important thing here is not highlighting one of the technologies, but it's the potential of integrating all of these technologies to a solution that can alleviate a number of issues with regards to knowing what a crop size is. So I'd just like to end up with my final remarks. I think technology is evolving at quite a rapid pace. I don't think that could be argued, and it's developing quicker as we go along. I think we need to sort of ask ourselves, why is Africa's uptake in the technology environment so slow? Why is it happening so slow? So one of the reasons that I would like, there's a number, but one of the reasons that I would like to put forward is that there's so much technologies out there, but you need people that really understand all of those technologies and how they can work together to provide ultimately a solution. Ultimately, a technology is not a solution, but implementing it into a system where it's integrated with other technologies, then it becomes a solution. I think today there's lots of technology that's being developed in, for instance, the medical field that could become tomorrow one of the most important technologies in the agricultural domain. But we need people that can see that and can implement it from that perspective. So are we developing the skills to recognize this? That's a very important. I've in my dealings in Africa, where I've done presentations, I cannot see that that's happening. There's a very much a focus on individual technologies, but putting it all together, there's not a lot of focus on that. So are we, as we go along, developing technology integrators? That's what I refer to it. And are we doing our best to make that happen in the form of, even in the research environment, are we putting enough effort for those technologies to evolve and for that integration to take place? I think that's my presentation. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Dr. Eugene. Thank you, Dr. Thabo Sithibe. I think these two previous panelists behaved than the ones before. My question before I open it up to the audience, so, and it's two questions for both of you. I think for me, the question about, I think we are struggling as a continent with issues of traceability, and what came into my mind was the foot and mouth disease, and how we can lose all the export quotas just because we can't trace what's where and where it's coming from. Do you see blockchain helping in that space, or any of the technologies that you have discussed before? How they can help, and any efforts that are being made to mainstream them to address that challenge. Then to Eugene, my question is really, I think, and you mentioned it, to say you cannot manage what you cannot measure. And one of the limitations or the challenges with smallholder agriculture is we just don't have records, we just don't have the data So are we finding these applications going there? Are they in those sectors of the communities? Are you using aerial technologies in smallholder agriculture, or do you see yourself doing that if not yet? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Indeed, blockchain is meant particularly for what we've just stated. Although I didn't cover it in details, blockchain has got four key principles. I did mention them. The first one is provenance, to ensure that we have got trace of the origin. And the second one is immutable, which is to ensure that you keep it as long as possible. There are other two key principles, but I think those are the key principles in terms of how to resolve the issue of traceability. Of course, traceability is not something that is coming, that has been there for quite a while. It's not something new. But what blockchain did, it introduced some of the principles that ensures that it takes traceability to the next level. And those are the two key ones that I've just mentioned. If you think about in terms of food and mouth disease, how long does it take us as a country if we've got such an outbreak? It takes quite a while for us to trace back to where it came from. And that's where the idea of provenance comes into play. If you think of what, just what I said earlier in terms of what Walmart and IBM did, it was a pilot, particularly focusing on pork. They have now taken it to the next stage. But what used to take about 7 days in a developed country, they brought it down to about seconds, 2.2 seconds, as they have indicated in their research. So it's absolutely something that can be done. But of course, as I've indicated earlier on as well, blockchains requires infrastructure, which is one of the key issues that are outlined as part of the research. And the other key issue that, of course, for every technology that comes into play, you've got some challenges. The other challenges that come into blockchain as well, for the example that you have given me, of course, it doesn't have an issue in terms of the right to be forgotten. But if you think about it in terms of the GDPRS, it does bring also other aspects which are legal aspects, the right to be forgotten. So if you have done an operation, let's say about quite a number of years back, and then blockchain's principle says immutable provenance. In other words, all the records of your faces, for instance, if it was a surgery, they have to be tracked. And they are to some extent in conflict with some of the regulations. And that's what is currently being discussed within the technology. But to answer your question, yes, definitely, it is the right use case. Thank you.
Thank you. Eugene, did you get my question?
Yes.
Okay, you can go ahead and make a response. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned during the presentation, our focus was when we developed and designed the system is that we can implement it within the Africa context, in other words, within the smallholder, small-scale farming environment. So that's what we had in mind when we developed it. Now, our application of that within South Africa, as has been previously mentioned, has been very much more in the commercial environment, just because the commercial structure in South Africa is so much more prominent than the small scale. However, what I can tell you is that we've done a project now for the Eastern Cape Department of Rural Development, which was only focused on smallholder and small-scale farming, looking at production, not just production, but looking at production, infrastructure, and production of various crop types, infrastructure as well as livestock and game within the smallholder, small-scale environment, and which was a very successful project, so much so that we have just actually been appointed to do the Vembe district municipality, which is basically the northern part of the Limpopo province. Their agriculture is predominantly actually small-scale agriculture in that area. It's a very dry area, as you all know, but there are some irrigation schemes around that area. So we've been just appointed to do what they refer to as a smallholder census, and look at what the agricultural production is that's taking place, including the livestock and including agro-processing. And they would like to be informed on potential areas where they can expand their agro-processing plants, etc. So that's the sort of purpose of that project. So even though we've applied most of our application was in the commercial sector because of South Africa's commercial environment, there's lots of applications now happening within the smallholder and small scale environment.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes. We need the mic. Please put one in. To link this. Sorry.
Thank you, Farai, and thank you for the very articulate presentations. I want to also echo Farai's questions differently around the tech transfer. Dr. Dupree's mentioned that among some of the critical things that needs to be in place is human capacity. And I feel that in terms of tech development and innovations, the capacity is there, but I think it's limiting in terms of tech transfer, especially in the smallholder sector. Because some of the technologies that we develop, you go and you train, you leave, and they start doing business as usual, the way they are accustomed to. So the question that I have then is, at what point of tech development do we need to start doing tech transfer? And are we doing enough to make sure that by the time the technology is ready and applicable, the industry is also well educated to utilize it successfully and to make more impact? Thank you.
Thank you, and I think you can both responses to both of them, isn't it? Okay, sure. So I'll start with you, Dr. Setibe.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the question. Yes, indeed, technology transfer is one of key challenges. But essentially, for me, I think what's underlying that key challenges is the first one, two aspects. The first one is change management, which is very, very fundamental. As we develop all this technology, do we have a proper change management process in place to make sure that we're able to have proper channels in terms of transferring the technology? We have got better training to the right people. Do they have infrastructure? Do they have within their localities? Are you training them in the language that they are able to understand? So there's quite a number of things in terms of change management that you have to put into play. But I think for me, the key one, which is very, very fundamental, technology aspects, what we normally do, we get together somewhere. We will be, I think, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be right here. All the government technology CIOs and high-tech companies, we get together. We develop a number of applications. But did we actually ask the person who's going to use the application whether he did that application? I think that's very fundamental. That's where we should start. You go to the person who did the service. In our case, farmers. Let's understand them. What do they need? Rather than just going away and building applications and bringing it back to them. So the notion that we know what farmers need, we need to change that particular mindset. I think that's very fundamental. If we can sit down with the farmers before we introduce all those technologies, to understand their challenges before we even get into technology. Technology will follow afterwards. I think those, for me, those are the two key fundamentals that we need to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Eugene, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. Thanks.
Okay, it's your turn. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So I would 100% agree with Dr. Setibe in terms of the response to that. What we found, especially is, just as an example now for this project that we're doing in the Venable District Municipality, is there's so much information out there that a district municipality, the officials aren't aware of that information being available. And that information would make a massive difference to how farmers react and what they sort of plant and how do they market, etc. So that information is accessible and it's public, but for some other reason it's not being used. So I would 100% agree that information needs to feed down to the farmers level. And obviously the best environment for that is the people that work with the farmers on a regular basis. I'm talking specifically of the small scale and smallholder farmers. So those would be In some areas, it varies from one area to another. Some areas, it's the input suppliers that almost work most of the farmers in that area. Other areas, it's the extension officers. So, yeah, it always amazes me that people at officials at district, municipality, provincial level aren't aware of the information that's available and therefore can't inform their farmers on that information, which would make a massive impact. So, but I 100% agree. We first need to know what it is exactly that the technology, how it should look like, and before it's rolled out to those areas. But I think our biggest constraint is actually getting it down to farm level. Who are the people that are working with those farmers at farm level? And I think there's also maybe a bit of a disjoint.
Thank you. Any burning questions before we wrap up? Yes, please. Just wait for the mic to come.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity. I was wondering how we could use the blockchain technology to improve or to improve the local production of agricultural crops in South Africa in terms of maybe resulting in less importing of agricultural crops in South Africa and more gain to local farmers. Thank you.
So I think this is directed to you, Dr. Seto.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions. So as I have explained earlier on, the fundamentals of blockchain is traceability, is to be able to assist those who are within the value chain to be able to track and trace the product on or any item that is moving within the blockchain. So with regard to your question in particular, I think it goes just beyond blockchain because blockchain, like as I've just indicated, is confined to traceability in terms of efficiency. But you need other kind of technology as well to be able to make sure that where you are, you develop a product using technology that are for local farmers. On typical examples, if you look at the technology that we use in terms of that we developed lately, we focus on smart devices. Technologies are available. You are able to support smart farmers in terms of understanding when to crop, what type of crop they should use, and in what season. But if your technology is confined to smartphones and other devices that they are not accessible to smallholder farmers, you are by default excluding those particular farmers. So you need to look at various type of technology. And that's where my point earlier on in terms of understanding the farmers and their challenges as well, to be able to direct the technology to assist them directly. Things like USSD for instance. You are able, even if you don't have the smartphone, you're still able to access information. So when you develop these technologies, you need to ensure that you also factor in terms of constraints, in terms of infrastructure that are of course at our midst that we have to cater for. I think those are the things that one need to look for. But for you to be able to get that kind of information, you need to talk to the farmers. Very, very important. And that's where the issue of the extensions, collaboration between with the technology providers and extensions become very, very fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had good sessions, very informative sessions. I'm just going to give an opportunity to all the four panelists to just give 1 minute close. And I'm thinking, all these technologies that we talked about, whether it's from a policy perspective, whether it's from really the application perspective, there are issues of risks, there are issues of trust. So if you can just give me two minutes each, your comment around those two factors and technologies within the agricultural space. I'll start with Dr. Maneshri, Dr. Lita, Dr. Tebo, and then end with Dr. Eugene. Then we'll close up.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I think because the digital agriculture is such a topical issue, a critical thing I think in terms of digital agriculture and modernizing the sector is about how do we ensure that we have national systems that have scientifically validated data, because the question to a farmer is, which data set should I use? And I think for us, in terms of research, development, and innovation, scientifically validated data in those databases is critical, and coordinating that. And the next thing is, how do you ensure that local entrepreneurs, because we want to look at promoting local technologies, how do local entrepreneurs harness and have, use that information to put the necessary tools in place? And I think we are at that stage where those questions, and I don't think we have all the answers as to how to do it. And the issues around data security, who manages the data, and if it's regulatory, obviously the Department of Agriculture becomes critical. But those are things that need to be at the forefront of then the access to information. But in terms of the smallholder farmers, the question of developing, I think that's already being done, because a lot of the demonstration of technologies are already being done with smallholder farmers. It's the question of long-term sustainability and how do you take that? So I don't have all the answers, but I think those are the forefront of what we as policymakers are looking at. Thanks.
You can take the mic.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I think just a couple of things from me. The first one, which I touched on also during my presentation, is we definitely need to increase our investment in R&D. I think the case has been made over and over again in terms of what the benefit of increased investment in R&D is. And really, some of our most enduring challenges can be resolved through our improved investment in R&D. The second point from me is, we need to close the gap between science and policy development. And this might seem trite. Again, this is something that we talk about, almost regularly when we talk to each other. But we need to find models that integrate the knowledge that's being generated through our scientific endeavors into the policy development space, because I think this is where we still miss it. That gap still exists. Just the other day, and this is about our most recent document, the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan that's just been signed off now by different stakeholders, where the building of infrastructure, crushing infrastructure, has actually moved to a province in Gauteng in South Africa, for instance, that is completely at odds with the recommendations of the spatial analysis process that was an input into the process of developing the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan. So it's not something that used to happen in the past. Even today, it's still happening. That's why we need to keep emphasizing it. And then the final thing for me is just to say we need to embrace these partnerships because, and whether we're talking about knowledge partnerships, resource partnerships, because this is the direction that the world is also, and correctly, I believe, going through, because our challenges are not necessarily ending across when we reach borders or when we reach the border of the institution. There is a lot of linkages that we need to understand and work with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Program Director. I think I do concur with the two previous speakers, but maybe just to add, I think for me the issue of collaboration is very, very important. In particular, when we come to R&D, two things I think for me. The first one is our research should be more applied. That's the first aspect. And then secondly, the key aspect is that collaborations. Previously, if you think about it in terms of, when we focus on in terms of technologies in particular, there, like I said earlier on, there are quite a lot of various applications that are out there. But if you really zoom into those in terms of utilization, be as ERC or any other organization, you will find that utilization is very, very low. And primarily, mainly to one of the aspects that I mentioned earlier on in terms of understanding our customers, which in this particular instance, our farmers, but most importantly, understanding their challenges, because challenges will differ from one place to the other. If you look at yes, problem technology as well. If you look at blockchain technology, it's a very good technology, but are we ready for that kind of technology? The answer is yes. But we have some work to do in terms of infrastructure. We have to get our fundamentals right to make sure that we have got infrastructure that is able to assist us with those particular challenges that we do have. But as we do that, one of the aspects which is very, very fundamental in terms of blockchain, for instance, is collaboration. We need to be able to cooperate with one another. I think that's very, very key in terms of the technologies going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dr. Eugene?
Thank you, Program Director. I think the previous panelist has touched on most of the areas. Maybe just two areas with regards to risk. I think one of the previous panelists mentioned in terms of data security. So just in terms of that, my experience has been that due to things such as the POPI Act, etc., there's a lot of emphasis on data security, but we must just sort of make sure that it doesn't hamper our accessibility to data. And I feel this is potentially becoming a problem in the sphere that I'm involved in, is that my sort of biggest thing is that we need to share data as far and as wide as possible and as quickly in agriculture as possible, because data becomes irrelevant over time. So we must just make sure that things such as the POPI Act, etc., do not hamper our people's access to data, which is public knowledge, not interfering with an individual's privacy, but we must make sure that it doesn't hamper accessibility to data on a regular basis. So that's the one aspect. And in terms of trust, trust is in the environment that we're talking about now is unfortunately it's grown over time. So a farmer will only rely on a technology that over time has proven itself. And I think that's important. So we must make sure that the technology that we take to them will work and will make a difference to their bottom line, which is basically their production or their income or whatever it's measured. So if we can't assist, if the technology can't assist with that, then we mustn't take it to the farmers.
Thank you so much. I think we can go on and on, but we had a good session. Thank you to the panelists for being generous with your knowledge and the experience and sharing with us. And thank you to the audience, those who are in this room and those who have joined virtually. We are going to close now, partly, and the track would resume at 2:15, focusing on the biotechnologies and their contribution in agriculture, but also looking at everything that we have discussed, the issue of convergence, joining all these technologies to assist the farmer and the end user by the end of the day, and scaling up. I think there have been talks about, investments in research and development. You just don't want to invest in a single project. You want to invest in something that really feeds into the community and helps the community. So please come back and get more information around biotechnologies, convergence and scaling up. Thank you. Thank you.